Okay, great. You are here. Yes, she did. I wrote her, but she didn't answer. But she left. But she was here anyway, so I want to start getting I mean, it's up to you because these songs usually are like smaller amounts. Like I think they actually hold this together as well. The recognition stuff I think makes sense. It's just how it's communicate and how people writing the book are and that's relatable. Well, the library makes sense. Forget about it. He's actually
Hi Anthony, how are you?
I'm just saying, I
Good morning, everybody. We're going to start in 2 minutes, okay? So we'll be beginning in 2 minutes. All right. So this is our last day. We'll be here for half of the day. Fortunately, our agenda for today is a little bit more relaxed than it was yesterday. I know yesterday was a really long day and a very intense day for everyone, but I hope you had a nice evening and you come here refreshed and ready to go for this last day of our conference, the summit, the Real Deal Summit. I would ask our panelists to come to the front, please. And what we have now is our second panel for the summit. And the general topic is the future of citizen deliberation in relation to the European Green Deal. Now, there's just been a European election, and the European election is not the main subject of what we're doing in the Real Deal project, but it's certainly relevant because this is a 3-year project, and as we are now in the 3rd year, we have until January to finish this project. The milestone of this European election is very important because 3 years ago, European Green Deal was relatively new. There was a lot of impetus behind it and goodwill towards it. Now, perhaps the situation is a bit different, so that's something that perhaps we can talk about today. But we have a great panel here. One of our panelists is online. The rest are in person here. I'm going to introduce the panelists, and then we'll have brief interventions from all of them, and then we'll open it up for questions and answers. So I'm going to go in the order in which we will be hearing from our panelists. And just a moment, let me just have everybody's information here. So let's see. We know Patrizia very well in this project. Patrizia has been working also not just in this project, but with us at CEU for quite a long time. She's the Deputy Secretary General and Director for EU Governance, Sustainability and Global Policies of the European Environmental Bureau. Environmental or environment? Okay. She leads the EEB's work on sustainable development and environmental justice and follows intergovernmental processes at the regional and global level, including the UN Environment Assembly, where actually we've worked together for a number of years. Bela Kušlić works in the ecology team of the Jesuit European Social Center, focusing on environmental policy and in the ecological transition of the wider network of the European Jesuits, and is now working on a project focused on future generations' rights. And he is a graduate of CEU, so we're very happy to have him back, and we welcome him again to CEU. Anthony Zacharjewski, if I said it right, good, okay, is president of the Democratic Society. DemSoc is a very important organization that in this field, it comes from the interaction of politics, participation, and technology, and works across Europe to connect citizens with the decisions that shape their lives. He's currently working as part of the EU Cities Mission Platform, where DEMSOC is the lead organization for democracy, governance, and participation, and is co-lead with EEB on the new Democracy for Transition Coalition launching in September. Camille Dobler is head of research at Mission Publique, one of the leading organizations specializing in citizen participation and deliberation in Europe, recognized with 25 plus years of experience in designing, implementing, and evaluating deliberative processes. Camille's work focuses on large-scale multilingual deliberative processes at European and global scale. And online, we have with us Professor Calypso Nikolaidis. Calypso is chair in global affairs at the School of Transnational Governance at the European University Institute, where inter alia, she convenes the European University Institute's Democracy Forum. She's also very active in the Democratic Odyssey project, and is also working with us in the Real Deal project as well. So those are our eminent panelists. I think we're going to have a great discussion here. After the initial interventions, we'll open up for Q&A, so please think about what you'd like to ask. We have an hour and a half altogether, actually till 10:30. I think we started a bit late. So without further ado, I will now turn the floor over to Patricia. The microphones are there on the table, so feel free. Would you like to come up here? Or do you want to? Okay, great. Patricia, you have the floor.
Good morning. Good to see you. I wanted to kind of start the conversation. I mean, you mentioned the recent European elections, and about the question, kind of, what do we kind of learn from that, and what does it mean for deliberative democracy? To make sure that we can continue and even accelerate progressive environmental and social policies in Europe. So, I mean, it was already kind of clear before we saw the actual election results that there would be a certain paradox in the form that, I mean, for many, many years, even decades, you can say, there has been a very consistent pattern that was shown by, whatever surveys and polls, Eurobarometer and others, that there's a very, very high number, like a majority of people in Europe who are concerned by environmental degradation, by climate change, and actually want the EU to regulate environmental issues. Obviously, there's some regional differences, but across the region, the level of concern is like 80, 90% in many, many countries, and also across age brackets, across different parts of society. And also in some of the polls or surveys that were just done just before the elections, so kind of the pre-poll surveys, nearly 70% of Europeans said that they're going into these elections being very concerned about the environment and climate. So that's a very, very high number of people. But then, and this is where the paradox starts, there are obviously then also more immediate concerns that people have, more kind of linked to their daily lives. So, I mean, obviously kind of questions of security, cost of living, and so on and so forth. So the ecological considerations, the ecological concerns for many voters were not the topic that determined which party they would choose in these elections. So yeah, we ended up with this paradox of, on the one hand, the vast majority of voters being very much concerned with environment and climate, but then not taking that to the polling station. And then, of course, there were other trends or other factors, such as what's been coined the stay-at-home progressives. So kind of the progressive voter pool, where a lot of people did not go and vote for different reasons. Linked to that, of course, is also certain voter frustration, especially with kind of ecological parties, by those voters who felt that progress was too slow, that they don't trust the promises made, or who were unhappy with compromises that progressive parties made. And then there was also kind of a growing level of voter volatility. So voters who are not determined really like what they want to vote for in terms of issues and in terms of candidates, and who decide last minute what they're going to vote for, and who are highly perceptible to kind of last minute information. And that kind of phenomenon was particularly dominant in, you know, the kind of the bracket of young male voters. So there are like different factors that basically led to this paradox between what are people concerned with if you ask them, but then what do they do once they go to the polling station? So all of that brings me to say that kind of political short-termism is obviously a problem of, let's say, the elected representatives, but it's also a problem of voters. Also, voters exhibit political short-termism, and that makes me think that, or kind of brings me back to our question of kind of deliberative democracy, where, I mean, all the experience has shown that, you know, through different kinds of formats, the different kind of topics that people get to deliberate, these processes allow people to get a different level of information around a topic. It allows them to reach a different level of reflection. It obviously allows them to be confronted with different opinions and concerns across their own society. And you know, the many examples that we have looked at have shown, and you all know that the recommendations and ideas that come out of these processes are usually defined by a more long-term approach. So I think for me, the answer seems pretty obvious, that where both voters and elected representatives tend towards political short-termism in a system that is only a representative democracy, deliberative democracy is maybe one of the key answers to create a space where, citizens and then eventually also the elected representatives have a chance to look at more long-term perspectives. And for us, I mean, as a kind of a big environmental network, for the first time before these European elections, we kind of linked up with a lot of other civil society organizations from the environmental movement, but also many others. We invested a lot of time and also resources to better understand how we can actually better reach out to people who go and vote, how we can, you know, speak to them more easily. And we also presented in May our vision of what should be coming after the European Green Deal, and that's actually built on outputs that we were able to do through the Real Deal project. So for instance, through the Civil Society Forum that this project allows us to run, we were able to get civil society together to deliberate and to come up with, for instance, a Green Deal gap report, and to come up with recommendations of what should come next as kind of, you know, let's say a big package of political priority following the European Green Deal. And this European Pact for the Future that we've presented is basically, fed by those deliberations and those ideas that we were able to do through the Real Deal. And it's not a surprise that, of course, we also very much emphasize on the need for innovating representative democracy and really institutionalizing deliberative democracy in the transition also at European level.
Great. Thank you very much. So a couple of times we've heard in the last couple of days about the challenges of as you mentioned, there's a lot of sort of underlying environmental concern, and how this manifests itself, for example, in the election results is quite interesting. It seems in some countries it goes in one direction, in other countries it goes another. We see that the Greens kind of fell back in Germany, but in other countries moved ahead. So maybe Anthony, with the work that you're doing, perhaps you could also mention a little bit about how you're also dealing with the fact that sometimes environmental concern manifests itself in perhaps a little bit unpredictable ways, but it's always there behind people's desire to participate and to take part in these deliberations. But it may sometimes they may sometimes feel more comfortable with a more democratic solution, but sometimes they are questioning a little bit whether the traditional democratic methods are actually giving them helping to reach the solutions that people are looking for.
Thank you.
Sorry to.
No. It's a really interesting question, and it goes to one of the things I think is, well, the 2 points I wanted to make up front, apart from saying thank you very much for turning up on a Friday morning. I'm impressed. Is that when people are inside the voting booth and they've pulled the curtain behind them, you have no idea what's going on. It's like the inside of a black hole. We know it exists, we just don't know what's happening. And I think that the reason for that is that people are driven to vote by all sorts of things, by personalities of politicians, by local issues, by European issues. So Belgium has national elections on the same day as the European elections, and regional elections as well, for that matter. And so we saw the Greens go backwards very strongly, pretty much everywhere, except in the Dutch-speaking part of Brussels. In the Dutch-speaking part of Brussels, they were by far the biggest party. And that's partly because the Minister of Mobility, who's a Dutch speaker, is very popular. And it's partly because the voters who are Dutch speakers in Brussels, the majority of them are younger and therefore a bit more pro-green. But also it was because of all sorts of factors to do with the far-right parties and how you voted tactically to keep them out. That doesn't mean that Dutch-speaking voters are more environmentally conscious than French-speaking voters in Brussels. Maybe that's true, maybe that's not true. We have no way of knowing. Because if you ask people, do you think the climate's important in a poll? They're probably going to say yes. There's a lot of social acceptability bias in polling responses, even when they're done remotely. So I think we've got to distinguish the politics of it, the policy of it, and the public opinion of it, because they're three connected but very different things. And this is where I think I work on net zero cities. So for those of you who don't know the cities mission, the European Commission or European Union has signed up to reach net zero by 2030 in 100 cities in the Union and 12 cities outside, 112 in total. I am certain that we will not reach net zero by 2030 in those 112 cities, because they are designed to be a real spread from like Sarajevo, which is going to find it really, really hard, to Copenhagen, which is like, maybe we could do 2029. So I think that in that context, we see a lot of local politics too. And the first thing to say is, politics is everywhere and at every level on this. With 112 cities, we are dealing with one of our cities going through an election every 2 or 3 months. And often an election that is fought on totally different issues from the environment and totally different issues from climate, but where the person who's coming in has one goal, which is not to do the same thing as the guy before. And I think that in that context, we have to be first really flexible in our work on implementation. We have to understand how the things that we're doing need to shift, even if the overall goal stays the same. We have to understand the language that works for parties of the centre-right and sometimes even parties of the far-right, to understand how empowerment of people does not have to be a green or a left-wing credo. It can be something that is about individual efficacy, the power of the individual versus the power of the state, which are very centre-right motifs as well. And I think that we've been learning in our work on this how to manage a sort of broad coalition language that gets people into the right place and ensures that even if you don't do a particular thing, you're doing something else that has an equally positive effect on your city's carbon balance. And I would say that the long-termism that we're talking about takes us through multiple elections. I'm already starting to think about the 2029 European election. Where do we need to be by then? If Ukraine, if the Western Balkans are members by 2034, what's that going to look like? Now, I think about that because I'm a total nerd, and I guarantee that almost no one else does, even in Brussels. But those sorts of long-term pieces of thinking make it really important that we do build on the successes so far of citizen participation at European level, but also at national and local level. Because citizen deliberation isn't inherently long-term. It happens on a particular day, in a particular place, with a particular group of people, and with not very many people either, 150, 200. But it gives people the opportunity to come away from the fear and the skepticism and the suspicion that they often have when they think about politics, and into a space where they have information, where they are surrounded by people who are different from them, but interested in what they have to say, and where they can see, hopefully, that their recommendations will have an impact. Doing that once is not enough, not just because of the number of people, but because of the fact that it is just a group of people. In 10 years' time, you're not going to be able to say, oh, we're going to do this because 150 people you've never met said 10 years ago that we should. We have to create something that's more continuous. We have to create something that works at multiple levels as well. And not to do the pitch for it, but one of the reasons that with our friends at EUB, we're creating the Democracy for Transition Coalition is because we see so many environmental organizations who really want to know about how to do this long-term participative work and how to build up citizen participation and to contribute to it. And we see so many democracy organizations who don't really understand how they can find the information, the networks and the connections to do democratic participation around climate. So those sorts of networks and those sorts of connections are going to be really important over time. And I think that in that, we have to understand that long-termism is really lots and lots of days one after the other, and every day we have to be doing something more to build on the participation practices that we've done, to connect them up and to make them stronger. I am, and I wouldn't have said this 5 years ago, reasonably optimistic about the European level on this. The picture around participation before the von der Leyen presidency was very, very different inside the European Commission. I remember, not to get into the anecdotes, but I remember going to 2 meetings in the Commission when it was still Juncker. And I won't say which directorates or who it was, but let's call them Good Cop and Bad Cop. And Good Cop said, I'd really love to do more of this stuff. It's really great. We've done some experiments in the past and they're fantastic, but just my hierarchy is not up for it. And the Bad Cop basically said, you will take my bureaucratic power out of my cold, dead hands. There were absolutely no open doors at all. And then, of course, we got a German defense minister appointed as president of the Commission. I thought, this is going to be very hard. It's going to be very difficult. But to my surprise, very positively, the German defense minister actually turned out to be driving, thanks to the parliament and lots of other pressure, some really interesting and innovative approaches. Camille, I'm sure from her work and our friends at Mission Publique will tell you a lot more about it. But those sorts of things have really set a trend, set a cultural trend inside the Commission. We need to replicate that further down the system and elsewhere in the European system, because I do think we are going with the grain of where society is going. Society and individuals want more agency and want more power. We need to make sure that the participation that we are doing with them doesn't deceive them. It doesn't tell them that they're going to have more power than they really will, but does give them the opportunity to express themselves and gives the governments and civil servants the opportunity to hear from that much wider range of voices that citizen deliberation can produce. Looking forward to further questions, but I'm going to leave it there and pass to my colleague.
Thank you, Anthony. I just wanted to check whether Calypso is online to make sure that she's also being able to participate in the panel. Hopefully we can have her picture up there in just a moment. So Anthony, you were talking about long-termism. Bela, you're working on future generations. We can't get much more long-term than that. And it's kind of a moral imperative behind what we're doing. There's Calypso. Thank you. Welcome. So, it's a moral imperative behind all of these discussions, the obligation that we have towards future generations. I think people who have environmental concern, it's part of that. It's always part of that, perhaps at a subconscious level. What's your feeling about the trends in that direction? Are we thinking about that more or less? Does the recent developments make you think more optimistically or pessimistically about how we can meet our obligations towards future generations? And what do you think about this as being a kind of, let's say, bubbling more to the surface in terms of awareness and taking part in actual policy making?
Thanks very much. That's a really hard question. Indeed, I'm working on a campaign for future generations. So maybe for a little context, I will try to summarize it as briefly as I can. We have a little NGO coalition working for 3 policy asks, basically. We want to have legal developments, political developments, and procedural developments in the EU to make it, work more long-term. The legal would be, you may know, in the Lisbon Treaty, we have like half a sentence for future generations. In the 3rd article, there is intergenerational solidarity and the principle of sustainable development. That's our legal hook there. And the principle of sustainable development is important because the idea of future generations comes from the term comes from the Brundtland report, where sustainable development was like, as a concept, first coined. So this is really core of the green movement, let's say. This is how the whole idea was, I don't know, developed over the decades. But now maybe it's seen a little bit in a different way. So for instance, one of the things I experience is that in Brussels, or well, because I live in Brussels and I work with Brussels people, it's not just the green issues. It's also now becoming AI, decline of democracy, demographic changes. So it's a lot of super slow, but super hard to change processes. And of course, many of us, coalition coming from a climate inspiration. So we want to, well, we are Greens, let's say, but there are some others who are, I don't know, there's a peace movement in our coalition, there is all kinds of people, and many youth, which is interesting. There is an interesting conceptual debate whether youth are the future generations or is something else. Anyway, we want future generations to be more present in the European decision-making because, well, the reasons which were discussed, that we think that the EU is more and more managing crisis and less thinking about long-term principles that it was funded on, and we think it should work on. And you can understand these years, why is it always managing crisis? But at the same time, this is causing a lot of problems. And therefore, we need like some institutional solutions for that. And our asks are partially on participation, exactly, because it's interesting to speak about this because in this building, I was taught to be like super, evidence-based and stuff like that. And now I'm a campaigner and I basically act on intuition and imperfect information and stuff like that. So, well, but still, what I see is the EU has done some experiments on larger, on participation with a larger, I don't know, horizon. There was this conference on the future of Europe, which was apparently pretty popular, but then we haven't seen much real consequences. And now we have the strategic dialogue on the future of agriculture, which is, again, the people I know are super eager to learn what is in there. It's super secretive. No one knows, really. I was told, because, well, we are also working on food, and in the food policy coalition, we were told that, yes, we are sitting there, but we are not allowed to tell you what is going on there. But still, this is a form of participation, and people are really eager to learn about it, to be there. They cannot, or some can. And also there was this climate councils in France, and now they're going on in Belgium, and people are very eager to go there. And then often they are very disappointed with the actual like political or legal outcomes. But this sends us a message that people are really interested in big and strategic questions. And I think it's actually easier to answer those questions for everyday citizens than in the normal impact assessment of the European Commission. There is some participatory element, but those questions are very narrow, very technical, very hard to grasp the actual questions. While if you speak about, I don't know, your future in 10, 20, 30 years, you can make much more sense of the questions, and then you can leave the details to someone else. So I think that the discussion makes much more sense if you speak about strategic long-term questions. So for future generations, and what do we want for future generations, or how we interpret this solidarity between generations, because also we want to make sure that present generations are getting what they need. So this discussion makes much more sense if you take long-term questions and like ask the big strategic problems in a broader way. So that's why we think that one of the things we ask for is a commissioner for future generations. This person should work for a more institutionalized participatory process in the EU, not just for the green questions, but all these other big long-term problems. And finally, I would also say a few words on the election, because obviously that's super interesting. And also I had so many inspiration before. I'm coming from this Jesuit organization, which is maybe in its nature or its origin, It's a little bit different from the usual Greens, although I'm coming from the usual Greens, but now I'm wearing this very different hat, and I have a chance sometimes to speak to people I could not before. And sometimes I speak to interesting EPP people, right-wing people, who would tell you how they see this. And what I see that there are no climate skeptics on the political right. I mean, of course, there is a few, but like sensible people, not climate skeptics. But they see this with a completely different lens. First of all, they are completely fed up with this idea that climate emergency and you should freak out. They see it as a hysteric reaction to, well, it's a serious problem, but whatever. They would, and you may argue this, but this is what I hear. And therefore, they kind of like the future generations idea because it's, you know, it's more like the family values. This is our descendants. So and this is not the reason why we developed this project, but we are pleased to hear. We will see how the EPP acts on it. But so you can use different languages than we've been using in the last couple of years. That's one lesson. The other lesson is that they say, well, we understand the science, but people don't want us to act as scientists tell us. And well, for instance, well, very senior EPP people told me that I understand, I think it would be necessary, but then we would end up getting, I don't know, 10%, 5% of the votes. And then you can do nothing. So maybe it's better to do half of the job or a quarter of the job and remain in power. Also because you are a political party, you want to remain in power. So their interpretation is that the citizens don't want climate action up to, I don't know, to the speed climate science or environmental science would tell. And I think it's an interesting problem because also I know what and why environmental science tells. And I think this is a specific political problem for the Greens, that we have basically two sources of truth. We can talk to people, we can understand how social problems are, and we can offer problems, but they also have nature, which is usually interpreted through science, and that tells you something hardly negotiable and is not really compatible with this side. And we, as Greens, tend to listen to the science. This is what, well, this is what was one of the greatest sentences of Greta Thunberg 5 years ago, that listen to the science, follow the science, act on science, whatever. And then IPCC says this and that, different scientific panels, publications. This is where the climate emergency narrative comes from. And in a way, I subscribe to that. But the actual citizens who are voting, they don't know, don't follow this, and they feel differently. And this is a huge political dilemma because our identity is that we understand this and we want to fix the planetary crisis. At the same time, the people who vote are not necessarily down to following it. And then I don't know what to do.
Thank you, Bela. And you've mentioned that environmental issues are only one of the main issues that people are struggling with. AI, you mentioned, and other ones. People are dealing with health issues, migration, all kinds of issues which come up. We turn now to Calypso, and Calypso, I hope you are there. And I know Calypso mainly through the Democratic Odyssey process, which is a very interesting, dynamic, consequential, active process. Not focused on environment, but focused on all the potential issues that relate to the use of citizen assemblies and other kinds of deliberative processes. And in those discussions, which I've taken part in, sometimes the environment comes up in the discussion, and it's always been the case if you've dealt in the environmental field, that sometimes there is a tension between environmental issues and democracy in its sort of abstract sense. And that has come out occasionally in the discussions, but also in other times, the environment as a kind of a foundational issue has also come up as a potential tool and mechanism to increase the public's interest in these kinds of deliberative tools. So I just wanted to ask you, maybe perhaps Calypso, in your opening remarks, to comment a little bit about how whether or not you think perhaps that the future use of these kinds of deliberative mechanisms, citizen assemblies on the European level by the policymakers, by the decision makers, what is the future of that, do you think? And do you think it really matters which issues you're working on, or do some issues, perhaps more than others, have more resonance in these processes and perhaps could be used more positively in the processes going forward?
Well, thank you, Stephen, and thank you for allowing me to join you from afar and for switching yesterday with Ulrike, so she could, since she was with us at that stage. But I have followed as closely as I could your wonderful discussions for this summit, and I guess I think that the promise is huge from everything we've heard in addressing your question. So really what we're talking about in this panel is sustainability, what I actually like to call sustainable integration for Europe, how Europe will establish itself in time. Are you hearing an echo, or is it just me?
No, we hear you fine.
Okay. It's maybe, for me, it's the echo from the room, but it's okay. I'll just deal with it. You mentioned, so how do we do sustainable integration in Europe? And I think we ought to mention, in terms of climate change and the real deals, remit, that indeed in the last few years, European institutions have adopted a lot of foresight units, thinking of the long term. And of course, this whole panel has talked about presentism and how we overcome presentism. So imagining futures and choosing the one you'd rather work towards. And this is all about, to a great extent, climate, but other issues. And I think yesterday was Hans Luger and others, you talked about combinatrix, you talked about the fact that one of the greatest lessons from the Real Deals assembly is that we should combine topics and combine the environment, climate with the environment, with issues of social inequality, etc. And so I think that's a great insight. And that's what we're seeing increasingly in these kind of forward-looking units in the EU. But to start, let me say something then about the EU and then come to the bigger kind of embeddedness that we're talking about. So in the EU, I mean, Anthony's already talked about this very brilliantly, and I'm sure Camille will too. But it's important for all of us to kind of be Gramscian, to think about what are the alliances and hegemonic alliances and counter-hegemonic alliances that we can continue to enter into with EU institutions. And that includes understanding the political sociology of both adoption and resistance. Right now in the Commission, and Camille has lived that day to day, sometimes it's almost captured her sanity, but she's with us, so we're happy. But there's also the Parliament, and Patricia started us with that. I've had the luck of being involved in a project whereby some MEPs want to have this idea of maybe creating a long-term permanent youth assembly for biodiversity. This is going to percolate, but of course the issue is what do you do when there's an old parliament that makes a project, and what happens with the new? What will happen with sustainability? And again, here we're talking about alliances. Those MEPs who want to continue with this vision will need support. We can talk about that. And we can talk about using the instruments. Bella talked a bit about that. That already exist. We haven't put on the table the ECIs, European Citizen Initiatives, but probably will be interesting to connect with these instruments. And that leads me to a theory of change, where we look where power lies, the state, the Weberian state, its transnational incarnation, but then with us, the network of assemblies, but all sorts of other ways in which citizen engagement happens in Europe and the rest of the world. And I'd like to mention, Stephen, that yes, as you said, I coordinate the Democratic Assembly, or chair it, with a wonderful consortium and team of people. And this democratic odyssey is trying to put in place a theory of change which is both top-down, working with all these actors at the national and EU level and local level that are representing of public authority, but also top-down with the movements that exist. And one such movement, I would suggest, will be a kind of federation or network of veteran citizen assembly, those that where you've planted the seeds. So we heard, from Skopje to Lithuania to all of these local assembly. What will happen to them? How will they connect? How can we build a translocal dynamic where the seeds connect with each other? And this is kind of what we want to do with the Democratic Odyssey. So the idea is, here was a wonderful project, The Real Deal, and it's a river. You've created a river, like your sister project, Phoenix, we're always also working on, and a project that is coming, Scale Them, and Camille can say more about it, will say more, and it was mentioned yesterday by Ulrike. Now, all of these dynamics, we're trying with the Democratic Odyssey to transform this into a very visible public travel journey of an assembly that will be both transnational and translocal, and really travel across European cities. So we're back to Bella's and Anthony's vision. And in traveling, it will kind of pick up new participants, bring some from other cities, plant seeds in cities, and also meet with transnational participants. So it's quite an ambitious project. I very much hope that many in the room will join it, and that indeed this will be one of the ways in which the Real Deal will continue to sustain its own momentum. And let me kind of say something, Stephen, about the bigger picture within which I see this embedded. And that bigger picture is the advent of what I call the third democratic transformation. After the cities and the parliament, city-states, the parliament, we in the 21st century are seeing right now the incipient emergence of a third democratic transformation with lots of resistance, democratic backlash. The dark side is there, very, very strong. But this third democratic transformation is everything the Real Deal and now Democratic Odyssey and Scale Dem are doing. And it's composed of 6 components. I'll just list them and we can have that as backdrop for our conversation. It's about transtemporal, transgenerational democracy. And Othon yesterday told us a great story about Athens and this conversation. But I would like to say that Real Deal assembly was brilliant, but every single citizen assembly is a conversation across generation by design. And not only by design and sometimes implicitly, but I think we need to make this much more clear. This is the specific occasion for probably 5 generations alive today. There's never been so many healthy generations alive together to discuss about the long term. And we've already all said, but we have transtemporal, yes, but we also have transnational and translocal. This idea of combining people from different cultures, settings, political contexts with local people who can talk about how their city is confronting the green and the environmental challenge and pollinate between those. And then we have a transmodal. And it was very clear that the Real Deal really went from different modes of participation, hybrid modes, for us, stakeholders, randomly selected citizen assembly. So we have that, and that's happening all over Europe and all over the world. And then transcale, very, very clear. You had very local assembly, national, and a couple of transnational. And finally, translational. And to me, this is probably the most important, and I will close on this dimension of the third democratic transformation, that we are translating between worlds, including, and we heard yesterday, great presentation about that, including with the absence, with the invisibles, with the non-humans, with, probably in our imagination, aliens who will visit us a few hundred years from now and ask us humans, what have you done? Either they'll ask, what have you done? Or they'll ask, wow, what have you done? And this is the kind of translation we should be looking forward to.
Thank you so much, Calypso. Now we turn to Camille, and indeed we are very happy that you are here, that you made it. And of course, working as a practitioner, sometimes you don't have the chance to take a moment away and think about these kinds of issues. But I think you have a wealth of experience that we can draw upon. Yesterday, we heard from Ulrika. She talked about this idea of a permanent culture of citizen deliberation. And we also heard, though, from our practical examples, that they have to manage expectations, that there are many barriers, sometimes misunderstandings, but there are tools and mechanisms to overcome those very successfully. And we had some very good examples of that yesterday. So perhaps you could talk a little bit about, your opinion as to whether or not, or what are the prospects, let's say, of building this permanent culture of citizen deliberation, and also think about the most recent developments, if that's had any influence on that in your thinking.
Thank you, Stephen, and indeed, thank you for inviting me. It's always a pleasure to stop in your hectic practitioner's agenda to take the time to reflect with peers and with other organizations are working on very different things than me. It is true, I am a practitioner. I am not an environmental NGO. So we share, I guess, our shared objectives, but my objective is perhaps not necessarily to save the planet. That's my personal, I would say, in my private life. It's my personal objective. My professional objective is, I would not say save democracy, because that's perhaps a little bit too big, but among ourselves, we understand each other. And am I optimistic whether we can do both of them together? Was kind of my 5 minutes, I would say, opening provocation, and then I can try to conclude with where that takes us when it comes to institutional cultures and what the EU is doing. And I feel after 2 days of listening to you, I need to come clear and I need to be honest with you. At first, every time as a practitioner, people were coming to me and saying, Camille, you're going to work on a climate assembly. I was just rolling my eyes. I was just like, oh, come on again. I need to talk about bicycle lines and nature-based solution and having a green roof above the parking while the planet is burning. I mean, what's the point? What's the point? We already know what to do. People have told us many times what they want to do. Plus, half of the time, what we want is just social consent or social acceptance of things that have already been decided, or science just tell us that this is what the solution is. There is no normative discussion to have on this. So for a very long time, I didn't like this kind of project, I have to say. Perhaps they would save local democracy if I put, a green roof above a parking, and I'm not denying that. As I said, part of my job is to try to save democracy. But when it comes to saving the planet, I was thinking, this is not going to stop the mountains from crumbling, on themselves right now in the Alps, for example. I love hiking. So I didn't really like it. And then indeed, I have been fortunate enough to work a lot on the Conference on the Future of Europe, on a lot of process at EU level. And I have to say that I started changing my mind last year, thanks to 2 randomly selected citizens called Patrick and Teresa. So I'm going to share a little anecdote now, because I think those are also why we are here, and they are important. Patrick is a Frenchman living in Bordeaux. He made no mystery about being Eurosceptic. He didn't want to come. His wife forced him because he keeps boring her talking about politics. So she told him, if you want to talk politics, you go to Brussels. And you said yes to the invitation. So Patrick came. And Teresa was a Spanish woman in her 40s, a journalist living in Galicia. And very sweet, gentle, very different from Patrick in her, soft skills, personality. And we were discussing food waste. Again, I started this thinking food waste. Nobody wants to waste food. I mean, this is going to be extremely consensual and pretty boring. And many of you actually who were observers to this process were as disappointed as me. We would have liked to talk about nuclear energy. I don't know, something hot, food waste. Well, okay, let's talk about food waste. So we are here talking about food waste. Everything is going very well. People are talking. Bit boring, but things are going well. People are happy. We're having fun. And suddenly, Patrick does what a lot of Frenchmen have done recently. Patrick started talking about strawberries. I'm explaining. We were talking about food waste, and then Patrick just said, but you know, all of this, we would not be wasting food if the strawberries were actually not tasting like plastic. And all of this is because we are cultivating these disgusting strawberries in Spain during winter. And then all the Spanish, and Teresa among them, were extremely shocked by that statement. I think it unfolded 3 hours of very heated discussion. And even after it was the second session, the session started, I spent my Sunday afternoon for 3 hours on the phone with Teresa, and I do not speak Spanish, trying to calm her down because she was extremely hurt. And she was not extremely hurt because we were talking anymore really about, to some extent, environmental issues and strawberries. She was hurt because for 3 hours, what we discussed afterwards with Patrick, Teresa, and the others was whether, you know, there is solidarity between France and between Spain, whether there is some sort of, you know, social justice, intergenerational justice or not. Because Patrick was saying, why do we even need Spanish strawberries? And then some of the Bulgarians in my room were like, yeah, we don't eat strawberries in winter anyway. The Austrians were just extremely uncomfortable with the conflict. It was quite an interesting situation for me as a moderator. But this was not a research project, so it still needed to be managed at that point. And Teresa was just like, yeah, but if we stop with the strawberries, do you realize how many people will lose their job? How many people will lose their job in Spain? And it's not just the strawberries then, it's the asparagus, it's the entire food and agriculture of Spain that is basically falling apart. And that's where I realized, actually, even on a very apparently boring topic like food waste, it becomes interesting, but it becomes interesting when you start talking about this question of solidarity, which are transnational solidarity, which are intergenerational solidarity. Those are questions of social justice. And now to go back to your question of whether hence 1 year after, I'm no longer rolling my eyes, except when I see social acceptance in a tender or in a contract, then I roll my eyes. But I always think there might be a strawberry somewhere, so let's give it a shot. But whether I am confident there will be more strawberries in the future now after the European election, to some extent, I'm confident there will be more food waste and there will be more European citizens panels. That I'm confident for the reason Anthony explained, because again, I've been indeed losing my sanity, but I've also accepted to lose my sanity because it is definitely worth it to see this culture of participation spreading. And it spreads across different DGs, and whether elected representatives are leaving me, I know public officials stay, and they are the institutional memory, especially in the EU context. So I fundamentally believe in that. And I am hopeful we will have more panels on environmental and ecological issue. But am I hopeful that we will have enough time to dig into all the strawberries within these environmental and ecological issues? That I am not sure, because indeed those are topics that have been glossed over in EU politics for many, many, many years. So the question, I'm neither positive no negative. I think we have made a first step that at least we have a place where we have a chance to talk about them. But let's see if we give enough space within these deliberative arenas that is now setting up to actually go at the heart of the big issues. And they're not limited just to food. When you talk about food, social justice is there. And this is what actually sometimes is worth talking. And I think you are not gonna save the planet if you do not address these issues. And you're not gonna save democracy either. So, voila.
Okay, thank you so much. So we'll now open up for the questions and answers, but first I'd ask everybody to give a round of applause to our panelists after their first intervention. Okay, so who would like to start? Do we have any questions, interventions from the floor? Yes.
Hi, thank you so much for a really interesting intervention. I have a question wondering what really is for all the panelists, because with with citizens deliberation, we need time to do it properly. We already know this, like preparation is key. Also like proper facilitation is key. Like it's not a process you want to rush. Yet the environment, climate crisis doesn't really have time, and we need time for proper citizens deliberation. So I'm wondering, how do you think you can most effectively use citizens deliberation, like time effectively, since we're dealing with something that needs a lot of time on one hand, and on the other hand, an environment and climate crisis that, well, doesn't really have a lot of time.
We like to take
It's a really good question. It's one that we hear quite a lot. I think there's two aspects to it. The first is that they take time. It takes time to run a process, and the second is it takes money, because time is money. I do think that the question around money is very real when you're looking at the number of issues that need to be dealt with. You can't do like a full-scale citizen assembly on everything, and indeed we have to invent and create ways of engaging people in deliberative and in collective contexts that don't require the high input of cash and time that some of these methods do. But in terms of the timeline, I think my two answers are: first, you can set up a citizens' assembly in 6 weeks. I don't recommend it, but you can do it. And also, and I've had to, the second point though is that we're dealing with something that is not time bounded, but very urgent. So everything that you do makes a difference, even if it takes a bit longer to happen. Yeah, it's not a lost cause in the same way that, like, if you like miss an exam, it's a lost cause. You can't go back to it. You know, every 1% of saving matters. Everything we do matters, but you know, nothing individually matters exclusively. There's no kind of cliff edge, we hope. So for me, I think the time question is both about urgency, but also about understanding how we can create the methods to speed up the implementation and setup of these types of approaches, how we can create infrastructures that allow us to reduce the costs of these approaches. I know that Calypso and Democratic Odyssey have been thinking about this as well, partly because if we are going to generalize this, if we are going to mainstream this, it can't be just a series of one-off things. And apologies to people in the panel who've heard me use this analogy before. You don't build a kitchen every time you want to cook dinner. You have a kitchen and you cook dinner in it every time you want to cook dinner. And I think that we need to create the infrastructure that allows us to make these things happen in a multi-level way repeatedly, because that will speed the process up. But I also don't want to fall into the trap of saying we don't have time for democracy. We absolutely don't have time not to have democracy. Because if you look at things like Stuttgart and the rail developments there, if you look at every process that comes up against political contestation, it's going to move quicker, and it's going to take better decisions if it's had democracy built into the start. So it's a time saver, not a time waster. But we have to make sure it's done efficiently.
Thanks, Anthony. This is indeed a question we get a lot. So I'm going to give you how I answer to them. I hope it's going to convince you, and you can help me convince others that this is a bad counter-argument to give us. First of all, there is some hypocrisy actually behind it. How long does it take for a parliament to come up with a law? You need to have an MP preparing a report. He goes to his committee or commission, then they need to agree. Then it goes to a plenary, they discuss. Then it goes to another co-legislator in the EU. Then it goes to a trilogue. How much is a 3 months deliberative process, you know, compared to that? Even if you add to this perhaps 2-year EU process. So that's one reason. The second reason is how much does it cost, whether it's for a city, a region, a country, or even the EU, to not listen to the citizens, then do a law, realize it's bad, backtrack, redo 1-2 years later. And that happens a lot. That happens a lot. So actually, all in all, indeed, if you have a little bit of long-term view, 3 months is very little compared to actually the cost and the time that anyway you invest, and that you might need to invest more if you do not engage citizens before going forward. So those are my two answers usually, and that do the trick.
Anyone else? Yeah. Calypso?
Yeah, just what, I mean, Anthony and Camille said it all, but Danielle, let's remember that one of the 3 demands of Extinction Rebellion is the spread of citizen assembly, and it's not for nothing. And we had very big debates about this. But my dear daughter, being a citizen activist, tells me all the time, Mom, we don't have time. It is urgent, but it is urgent to act long term. That's what we're all saying, right? That's the credo of the real deal, to build a culture, to build a democratic culture of long term and strawberry solidarity. We're going to start calling it that. I mean, that is not time wasted. Every step that is taken won't be time wasted, because slow governance is about indeed not rebuilding the kitchen. It's about making sure that every step is going to be a step for the next step, that there is pollination, to take the best metaphor from nature, that somehow we make sure that the processes we create pollinate locally and across locals, and that will gain time. After all, let's not forget that fossil fuel lobbies have been in existence for half a century at least, in fact, much more than that. So they didn't think, oh my God, we've got to, it's all about short term. They had very long-term strategies. And that's why they're still on top. And let's not mistake what we're up against as the real deal, and as what we are all caring about. We're up against forces that have taken the time to build strategies. So to me, as Anthony said, this is all about not a cliff edge, but a very long-term strategy, actually.
Okay, the back, and you'll be next. Yeah.
Hello. Yeah, it's more like a comment. I mean, the issue is really, I believe that some of the problems we are facing today should have been addressed 10 years ago, let's say, through citizens' assemblies and other activities, because it's in the nature of many environmental problems that they take time. But it didn't happen. Some areas didn't, in other areas it didn't. So now we face a situation where quick action is needed. So we are very often, if you think about floods, etc., we are in the mode of firefighting. So we already reached the point where through deliberations, strategic thinking, long-term approaches, structural changes, we can improve the environment. We reach the situation where we just can try to make the best out of a bad situation. Therefore, we talk so much about mitigation, etc., which basically means, guys, we have the problem. We have to find a way through building walls and dams and to deal with that, because we didn't address it early enough. So I feel we basically we'll deal always with both. We deal with the need for quick action where it's no time for complicated, expensive processes where we have to hope on wise decision makers to do the right things. But we also should have the long-term perspective. So what do we have to address now to see an effect in 10 years? Because that's, or 15, that's the time scale we are talking about when you talk about environment, ecology, ecosystems, etc. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Okay, let's take a couple of more, one on the right and then Inga later. Yeah.
Thank you. Good morning.
Yes, please.
Othon Kaminiaris from Eliamep from Greece. Thank you all for your interesting contributions. We talked time. I want to talk about space as well. We talked about the C40. Anthony talked about the C40 cities and climate neutral cities. But what about the less privileged places? In Greece, for example, we have a peculiar geography. We went with a hybrid event to include as many people as possible and more decentralized places, and people had a lot to say. And it's just a comment and food for thought, since the project is going to an end. Maybe the next step is also including those places. We're talking about leaving no one behind, but maybe we're going a bit elitistic with just involving central cities, big cities. I mean, we do have to make them climate neutral, but maybe trying to do smaller cities climate neutral would also give us some hope, since they're emitting less. Maybe they can become climate neutral quicker, and this could give an impetus. It's also food for thought for next projects as well.
Yep.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next is Inga. I think we lost, we might have lost Calypso. If we could try to bring her back into the panel, would be great. Yeah. Great.
Thank you. I want to have 2 points. One is reminding us all about the story that the combining the topics is actually, and not only combining, but even balancing, striving for a balance is actually good old sustainable development. I haven't heard that term at all, but it would be smart, I think, to not forget about it. And actually the concept of sustainable development also always had governance issues in it, including a strong focus on participation, including democracy. So let's just, for all our framing, not forget about that, and maybe reuse and revisit. The other I wanted to ask is more, I hear a bit, I have the feeling there is an elephant in the room, which is economics. I don't hear that at all. Social injustice, social and bringing social and planet together. Camille said it, just transition. And I don't hear at all, what about the extreme split in distribution of wealth and income? How does that feature in your dialogue? You said it with the right-wing parties, they don't deny climate change. How does that feature? I mean, it's a very leftist thing, so maybe that's problematic in political debates, but in principle, and we tried this in Real Deal, at least we set a little stepping stone towards the big thing of democratizing the economic system. So I think for future activities, that's a super important path we need to continue, which we did with the European semester.
Okay, so let's have some response from the panelists to these questions, and then maybe we'll still have time to collect a few more questions after. And I think, Calypso, did you want to start?
Yeah, so I've turned off the screens because I realize that I'm a big head over there.
No, we want to see you.
I'm anti-hierarchical, so I don't like this, the look and feel. And thank you, Diana and Christian in the room for alerting me. I just want to mention that two wonderful participants, Diana and Christian, are there representing DO, as well as many others in the room. And yes, I so think those two comments on by Othon and Inge are so related because it is all about whether what we do is a luxury and is something for the privileged structurally or those privileged for a moment, and how we need to think structurally about the enabling conditions, not just the moment events, but the enabling conditions, real deep democratic reinvention. And I'm doing this work with my friend and colleague Albina Azmanova on the relationship indeed between the political economy of precarity. People don't, not that they don't have the will or the intention or don't care about their children in the long term, they just don't have the capacity to get involved in that way because they live such a precarious life. So we have what we call the paradox of democratic time, but never before has there been such an attention in democracy long term against what Tocqueville would have said. Yes, that's true, and we see it everywhere, and we see it indeed in the care globally that we have for sustainable development, or what I call sustainable integration in Europe. Yes. That's true, but never before has there been also so much resistance or incapacity to oblige. So we need to think structurally about what we are talking, what we're discussing today, and that is true in time and space. And often we know, indeed, all of the in Greece, this is very true, but all around Europe. the cities that suck all the energy? Are we going to contribute to that simply by building networks of big cities? Is that what we know? So we want to think about this metaphor of pollination, or maybe there are other metaphors like contagion or going viral. Because what we're trying to do will not be sustained if it's always initiated by the few. It has to come because people locally want to do it. Without us, without facilitators, without this whole world. They see it on the internet, they're ambassadors, and the pollination appears in different ways. And this is where we need to be very, very creative. And in Democratic Odyssey, one of the things we think about is how to build platforms from the bottom up, simply by connecting our mobile phones, where you don't need a top-down structure. And there are many other ways we can imagine. So that's partly what we want to think about, is how do you help pollination without controlling it? And therefore, it will go into all these villages.
All right, Bela?
Thank you. I'm going to address 2 points. One is the economics. In it, I was talking to this guy at the Wilfried Martens Center, which is the think tank of the EPP, and he said, it's just about Germany and it's anecdotal. So, but this is what I have for this question. So he said they did a research on the electoral sociology of the German parties and voters. And who is voting green? These people are usually well paid. They're having public jobs. So they're super secure. They can afford to sacrifice a bit, even that maybe feels good to a green thinker that, well, I'm giving up a little bit of my lifestyle and we are saving the planet. How nice that is. Then upper middle class, they're all voting socialists. Then like the working class, that's CDU, CSU, and all the ones without education, without jobs, in the East, in all kinds of miserable conditions, economically, sociologically, they are voting AfD. So, and they are not interested in new fancy heating systems from a top down. I'm not really familiar with the German debate. I just saw that there was this big thing there. So probably many of you know the debate better. But this is how it's kind of is layered. And it's a little bit goes against the traditional identity of these parties. But at least in Germany, this is what they measured. To me, I'm Hungarian. It sounds familiar. So it's a very different political system, obviously, but like who can afford to be progressive? Who can afford to think long term? It's a little bit like your personal life. If you don't have much money, then you are not thinking about how would you save, how would you send to university your kids who are now, I don't know, in kindergarten. You just try to make at the end of the month. If you have more money, then you also start to think about long-term future in your own life, and probably politically it works similarly. And another point to this quick, do we have time, quick action, quick decision versus participation? I think, I understand the question very much, but I think this is a little bit misses the point, because in my view, participation, the main goal of participation is probably not to kind of close the question and come to a final decision, and then finally we can act. This is what I sense, that this is behind this question. Okay, we do this deliberation, whatever process, and then we finally have green light to save the planet or whatever. I don't think this is how it works or how it should work. It's more about the engagement. How are we able to act as a political body? Are we able to like interpret what's going on? Are we able to reframe the questions like with the strawberries? And I think a lot of questions have to be reframed. And maybe, I'm saying a little heresy here. I can imagine that, well, to save democracy or for the process, I can imagine that people would agree that, well, then we will have these kind of social outcomes and we are happy with 2.3 degrees, maybe, or not happy, but we accept it's going to be 2.5, maybe 3. Or they say, okay, we understand the problem, we take the risk of solar radiation management. All kinds of things the Greens would traditionally say, no way, you are killing yourself, but you may end up having that decision as a political body, because it's just, you take either this risk or that risk, and maybe the political body would take something you wouldn't. So I think we will have to prepare ourselves to kind of abandon a little bit the scientific scenarios, which I love, but the procedure that produced those scenarios and proposals are not exactly democratic, not in an anti-democratic way. It was just designed by professionals with a very specific perspective. And I think the goal of participation is to enable many other perspectives, and probably then the outcomes would change too.
Patricia.
Thanks. Yeah, but I'd also like to kind of come in on the debate on kind of the what you raised, Inge, about the kind of socioeconomic aspects. I mean, I think many of us have pretty quickly come to the conclusion that the fact that the Green Deal was a Green Deal and not a green social deal, you know, has caused major problems in making sure that we can get or we can maintain the political momentum, to even go faster, so I mean, looking at the question of how can deliberative democracy help? I mean, I think as ecologists, we have an inherent interest in making sure that we can bring very difficult and provocative questions about questions like wealth distribution to deliberative formats, because those kind of questions are not really taking place in the public political sphere in a very kind of, they happen in some niche discussions, but they're not happening in the election campaign. They're not happening, out there in the big public debates. So I think looking ahead at the next 10 years, and somebody else asked about kind of, what are the strategic interventions that we have to do now? I think this question of distribution of wealth, distribution of income, even in our region, where kind of, let's say, the gap is still smaller than in other parts of the world, but also growing, is one of the pertinent questions. And I mean, we saw the mistake of how decarbonization policies, whether that's linked to heating, which was that example in Germany that showed very much like how not to do it, also from a communications aspect, where decarbonization policies are thought without really thinking on the social impact, and then as an afterthought coming up with mechanisms that are meant to kind of cushion the social impact without really questioning why we have certain inequalities in our society, where they come from, what causes those inequalities, and how can we actually overcome them. And not only once we see that the social impact of decarbonization policies then first affect those who are already in a tight spot. And I don't see a lot of political courage from mainstream political parties to really ask that question. So maybe, questions about, for instance, how much wealth is too much? Where should a wealth tax come in? What is extreme wealth and where do we need to stop it? I mean, these questions I think could be very, very interesting topics for deliberation. To kind of, kickstart again a broader societal debate about distribution of wealth, but also of burdens in our society. I mean, we also talked about environmental justice yesterday, which is the other side, the distribution of burdens, but also the distribution of wealth. Then I also wanted to react what the colleague from Greece said. I think that was very interesting because, obviously most of the assemblies and whatever formats, most of those happen indeed in the capitals and major cities, in theory, and maybe also in practice. Of course, participants also do come from the more remote areas, if the formats are successful in being truly representative of the society that are meant to represent. But I think it could be a very interesting experiment, and I think that there's been those experiments. I also remember that we had many years ago a small experiment not in a Greek island, but in a kind of city somewhere quite far away from the urban cities, setting up like an agora in the village center and really bringing the whole village population together to discuss about sustainable development. But I think, and that links back to the question of resources for deliberative democracy, it would be great to basically bring national citizens' assemblies and have them in the remotest part of the country or the most disenfranchised part of the country. Obviously, that requires more resources to bring people to areas which are hard to reach. But given that we already talked about the question of resources, I mean, deliberative democracy costs money. And I mean, we experience that now ourselves in that project, trying to run these experiments. I mean, you realize that good deliberation comes with certain costs. So I think that's also another element that we need to kind of discuss and get kind of political buy-in, that there is sufficient budget to have, I mean, you know, where we establish deliberative democracy. And I mean, a parliament costs money, obviously, other democratic processes cost money, and we accept that as citizens, as taxpayers. I mean, we probably don't accept the excesses, but I mean, in general, we accept that there's a cost to democracy. So I think we also need to kind of get more kind of societal buy-in for additional costs for innovative forms of democracy.
Okay, thank you. Let me. We had one last request for an intervention. What I'd like to do is we can take that because we're just actually a little bit over time. We'll take the last intervention, and then I would ask everybody to just have some final remarks, your final statement, and let's say 30 seconds to a minute. We have two.
And third one might be earlier, like these two.
Oh, okay. Sorry, I missed that. So who is first? Sorry. Okay.
All right, I will be very quick.
Yes,
And
thank you.
I'm Christian from the European University Institute. Very happy and glad to be here. And thank you for these amazing discussions. I want to just say, I think about time pressure. I am 24, turning 25 years old in 1 month time, and our generation has dealt with time pressure since we are teenagers. So mostly related to environmental crisis and multiplied by all the different crises that we all experienced in the last decade. So yeah, it's a topic. And yes, this could have happened 10 years ago. But in my experience as a student recently, I did an experience at the European Parliament, and I am in this kind of work since 2018, 2019, when I still discovered deliberative democracy, mini publics, and so on. But there are still problems of convincing our community of practitioners and researchers that this is the direction to follow. In fact, I spent 3 months of my time at the European Parliament convincing public servants that a citizens' assembly is doable, is convincing argument and a direction to follow, or still practitioners of other kind of deliberative forums still ask me, but Christian, I'm not sure that this is something we should focus on because of lack of mass representation and mass participation. How you fix those problems and all the normative conceptual problems that we as researchers will love to discuss. But we cannot spend our whole time caring about the normative aspects and the different approaches that we should use. So as a researchers, student, I really feel the pressure to become a campaigner and become a practitioner and turning to the civil society. And it's a coming back and forward in these two words. And I think our generation feels that this kind of forums gives me very much hope of this reconciliation between the two words. Because a lot of times happen that, different organizations think just about their own green garden and not collaborating one another. So I love to see this kind of collective collaboration and intelligence come into a one wave that hopefully will convince the skeptical that is also and mostly within our community. I observed the European Commission, European Citizens Panel, and participants, despite feedbacks that were constructive after all, were eager to continue deliberating after this kind of experience. So we have to give the opportunity to participants that are few, 70, 150 per assembly, to be the ambassadors of these experiences in their own local communities.
Thank you, Christian.
So thank you.
Yeah, thank you. We're eating a little bit into the coffee break, but we're going to have more time for discussion after the coffee break. So please make your interventions very quick.
Okay, very briefly, I would have had many questions, of course, but let me remain with the comment and maybe towards Calypso in the Odyssey project. So recently I have been observing a trend amongst European policymakers and European Environment Agency that we talk about the European Union as one entity in terms of its environmental and social impacts. To some certain extent it's correct, but at the same time there are huge differences amongst and between the environmental impact and social impact of countries. The ecological footprint of countries in the north and in the west can be 1.5, 2 times the size than countries in the east. How did these questions arise in your deliberative processes? How would you be able to address these issues in the transnational dimension? You mentioned, Calypso, of the future of deliberation related to the Green Deal, because I find it very dangerous, this view and this idea, for example, also statistics at the level of the EU now talks only about averages. If you want to search for country level impact indicators, they become less available. And also the reports of the European Environment Agency talk about average EU citizen impact, but this is not true. This is not like that. There are big differences, not just between lower income and high income people, which is obvious now for everyone. We talked about it a lot, but also amongst countries and regions. Thank you.
Okay, last question from Jan, briefly, please.
I'll try to be brief. Comment on the strawberry policies. My first job with the UN was in Chile in 1972. I passed a mural. They talked about the revolution. It said, the revolution is like a strawberry. It's red and strong on the outside and juicy and tasty on the inside. So always brought that with me. Another quote from Timothy Snyder, who said, history does not repeat, but it can instruct. And there's a lot of pessimism in the room when we talk about the future. And one of you talked about a coalition of language, which is an interesting thing. Do we have to change the narrative when we talk about environmental and democratic challenges? We can't scare people to action. We need to get them through us. And I think these deliberative processes can do that. Don't despair. I mean, the fact that civil society and researchers have power is a very good proof of that, is what's just done on the plastics convention. Civil society and researchers has kept it on the agenda for 10 years, and it resulted in a convention. So the combined forces of this will give result. Goes into the long-termism. We've created something, you have created something with the real deal. Will you be able to continue? Because the continuity and consistency here is very important. Steve, you said to me, we need to save this project. And I think that's important. It doesn't stop in January. I really hope this can continue as strongly as it will. And we do have the money. It was an estimate of realizing the SDGs, the 17 of them, as promised, will take about 4% of the global GDP, leaving 96% of us to fool around with other things. So let's continue and let me creating a positive narrative and not be distressed. Back in 1961, Rachel Carson published a book Silent Spring. She was a lone voice. Today, we're millions. We want the same. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Jan. So I interrupted Anthony earlier, so I'll give you the first chance. It's a lot of provocations and pressure on our panelists from these various interventions, but I'm sure they'll be able to handle themselves very well. So we'll start with Anthony, and then I think we'll go maybe in a circle this way. Anthony, Bela, Camille, and then Calypso and Patricia will have the last word. We fortunately have a little bit longer coffee break today, so we're going a little bit into the coffee break, but I hope you will be patient with us. Anthony.
So great questions. I'm not going to address all of them. I will say, though, on the topic of economics and socioeconomics, it is one of the most important challenges that we have in two ways. First, we have to understand how we bring those socioeconomic conversations into the climate conversation, which then turns into, to be honest, a conversation about everything, about like a new way of doing of making the world. I'm really up for that conversation, but then how do you split it into manageable pieces for deliberation? I think the second part of the economics of it is, when the political attacks on deliberation come, and they will come and they're already coming, they will say it is hobby politics for like left-wing, middle-class, well-educated people living in cities, well-off, people like that. And that's partly because they want to other the people who are running these processes so that they can other the people who are in those processes. And so for me, we really have to maintain the narrative of solidarity, even as someone who is like urban and centre-left and living in a city. I'm not well off because I run an NGO, but other than that, they've got me bang to rights. But the people in the processes we run are not me. And I think we need to understand, how do we tell the story of the people, like Camille was doing with her strawberry story? How do we tell the story of the people in those processes and demonstrate that they are authentic participants and authentic citizens? Because if we don't do that, then the processes themselves will be just treated as kind of fancy, expensive lobbying. The second thing I wanted to add on that is there are methods to bring these voices into more prominence within the deliberative processes and outside. So we've just finished, end of last year, we finished the federal government in Belgium's Just Transition Citizen Assemblies. And we constructed, with the help of Mission Publique in the design and with the help of our friends at Particities in the delivery, a process that involved participants who were selected from groups in precarity with the support of the organizations that worked with people in precarity to help them make their case better in the spaces where they weren't just being talked down to by like doctors and whatever. And that didn't work 100%, but it worked 50%, and there's a lot of stuff we can learn from that. But fundamentally, I think the narrative, and this is where we have to be careful about the language we use, but the narrative really is about solidarity. And going to the question about cities, I think it's absolutely legitimate to say lots of participation work is happening in and for cities and for city residents. But there's also, as Patricia was saying, a lot of stuff happening in rural areas too. We in net zero cities, Athens is one of our net zero cities, but also Trikala, which is 60,000, Kalamata, which is 60,000, Kozani, which is 40,000. And Athens is in that network to help those cities with the resources that it has. And if we can build that solidarity between places, and then Trikala can be working out in its rural communities, that's going to be the way in which we can structure this kind of multi-level engagement. I do think that there's a lot to be done. There's a lot to be made, lot of political case to be made. And I always struggle with the balance between how much are we in the participation community actually espousing a political position, which is about equality and power, which sounds quite sort of, the modern equivalent of what socialists were talking about in the 1920s. And how much are we like neutral arbiters and judges and this kind of very sort of desiccated civil service kind of mindset? And the answer is we're a bit of both. We're campaigners and we're process runners, and we have to understand how we balance that. And finally, because I'm sure I've gone over my minute, I'm keeping you from your coffee, and me from my coffee for that matter. I think the point about optimism is well taken. I think it's very easy to look around and to despair. And if I read another article about how all young people are voting for the fascists, even though the numbers are pretty much equal across all age groups, I will scream. I do think though that we need to be realistic, and I go back, as I often do, to Schumann. I'm neither optimistic nor pessimistic. I'm determined.
Thank you. Well, maybe because I'm from the East and I do feel this East-West differences often, I have a little bit of pessimism to close, because for me, I'm not an expert of participatory processes and stuff, but I've encountered few in various EU-funded projects. Usually they kind of require you to make it participatory this and that way. And it was very funny a couple of times when we have to engage, I don't know, a Hungarian national park to organize a citizens assembly or something. So we do a plan together and participatory action planning for environmental management of this forest. And then people already know, oh, it's again that. We create this fancy flip charts. And then some of the people will stand up and say, please tell Brussels this Natura 2000 is rubbish. And then we tell them, that's not how it works. And then they say, then why did you invite us? And the other ones are already knowing that this is just nothing. And they are here either for the coffee or because they are friends of the people who organize it. That's my experience here, was my experience here in Hungary. So, and maybe a more serious example, we have this European Citizens Initiative in the European Union. The bar is super high. I think we didn't have 10, which was successfully collecting the 1 million signatures. But even with that, none of them were implemented in any serious way. So it's all cool, but we have to make it in a way that has like real stakes in a political sense. Otherwise, people will be disappointed very fast with the whole idea of participation, assemblies, this and that, doing it online or here and there, this or that way. They will just understand that they were fooled again. And then we just lose the whole tool. And then we have to come up with something, I don't know what, but something else. And that would be a really big mistake. So this is all nice, but we have to make it work politically. We have to give it weight. Maybe that's a treaty change, I don't know. But this is super hard and super important. Thank you.
I'm not sure there are still questions really to be answered, so I'll really very much just conclude by saying two things. First, I'm really grateful that you brought up the importance of also geographical inequalities, which for me are somehow also linked to socio-economic inequalities, not always, but these geographical inequalities, at least in my own country, France, are fueling a lot of resentment and feeling of being second-class citizens. And I'm going back in 10 days to vote in my 2,000 inhabitants little village in Alsace. So it's not even a town, it's really a very small village. Half of the people there are working in Germany. It's a wealthy village, 60% Front National of the European elections. That's the reality of small village. So I'm well aware, and I think there are hopefully a lot of upcoming projects, including the ones scale them that you heard a lot, that we are hoping to succeed, to pollinate in this kind of context, to complement the work that other projects are doing extremely well. So it's important to indeed keep those in mind. Sometimes they are left out. There's also, of course, thinking about, again, my village, they do not speak English, they do not know what the EU is doing, they have never heard about the European Citizens Panels. And that goes back to the second point. Thank you for your call for optimism. I am optimistic. Many of people in my team actually idealistic. Perhaps it's my French side. Sometimes I tend to be pessimistic or rather sarcastic. I like to think that I'm a pragmatic, and I know what are the percentage rates of people accepting the invitation to the citizen assemblies I'm doing. We have heard in your workshop that you also struggle, with having perhaps meeting your quota as your objective. We know that there is a demand, there is a thirst for more participation, for deliberation, for participation. But even within my field, I feel like sometimes there is a taboo among our peers, Anthony, to even say, yeah, okay, they won't participate, but when you invite, they don't come. And then what do? I feel so powerless sometimes. So yes, there is a spreading of this culture of deliberation, but it's still very much part of elite groups and people like us, people within the institutions, which is very important. Because people now, the civil society is also beyond the democracy field, environmental actors, social actors, minority defense group, feminist association who have always done participation, but it's so this is going to spread, but we are not there yet. And hopefully one day, the 2,000 inhabitants in my small village will know that there is an other way than just casting a Front National ballot to deal with their resentment. That is my hope. But currently we are not there yet. But if I was not optimistic, I would have changed jobs already.
Calypso.
I wanted to react to the direct question about democratic odyssey by first echoing Anthony, say that the democratic odyssey is first and foremost a campaign for being a process runner. And in that sense, this is responds and echoes and magnifies Christian's intervention earlier, that we need to think much more about the relationship between our deliberative processes and social movements. Yes, social movements call for citizen assemblies, but do citizens' assembly reach out to social movements? To me, there is too much, sometimes a sense that we need to keep the assembly pure, non-connected. Instead, in other cases, we have really more porousness. We need to speak, really, in my view, porous assemblies that work and synergize with social movements. An old theme, but we need to reiterate it. And underlying this thing is back to solidarity, which has been mentioned again and again and again, which, as opposed to justice system, is a choice that individual and group make. Solidarity is a choice, but as opposed to charity, it's among equals. And that's the spark that we want to help grow with what we're doing. Kant would have said, create enlarged consciousness in Camille's village, where she's going to vote, and in Brussels, Greek village, etc. And so, but this is a solidarity across time and space, and not trends. It's such an enlarged solidarity that, yes, it's a daunting challenge. And so, but that's fine. That's, what's the point of life if we don't take in daunting challenges? And my third point related to that is that I call myself, an academic activist, but I'm in the world of social science, where we talk about a lot about social cleavages in data, in economic data. They may or may not lead to polarization and effectiveness, depending on how they connect to each other. But that's the world we live in, conflict. That's what we have. How do we connect that world and the world of facilitation and organizing assembly, which often has, and I don't take it too negatively, but a kind of a rush to consensus. We have little time. We've got to get to these recommendations in 1 weekend or 3 weekends. And I would say that we shouldn't shy away instead from agonistics, very pure agonistics. They're really, really hard trade-offs in the climate emergency. We all know that. Very hard choices to make. Who pays? And if they pay, who's compensated? The whole Gilets jaunes and movements, this is what everything is about. So in our assemblies, and I think that was a bit the spirit of the question, we need to show this agonistic data. We need to show what the hard trade-offs are. We need to ask who's ready to make them how. And that's kind of what we want to do. Democratic Odyssey is going to meet in Athens at the end of September, and then later virtually, and in Vienna and in Florence. And we hope, if there is enough budget, that it will be traveling and that we'll be engaging with also hard numbers, participatory budgeting. There is the money, as Jan said. It's out there in many different ways. And technocrats are discussing how the European Investment Bank or whatever will mobilize capital and hedge funds. This is what citizens need to debate, because at the end of the day, their taxes will be used. That's what the Green Deal was all about. The Green Deal, at the end of the day, and I just want to end on this, thank God the real deal was here to help ground it a bit in democratic processes. But we've had hundreds of billions distributed in non-transparent ways across Europe. And we haven't talked about how it's funded, because that will come later for future generation. But there will be debts, and it's not only corporations who will pay. So I think what we all need is vigilance, democratic vigilance, and asking for democratic respect from those who spend our money to do what they deem is necessary. And instead, it needs to come back to citizens, and us in this room can do the little, a small stone in helping go in this direction.
Thank you, Patricia.
Yeah, I think I want to have one final reflection about what I saw coming up in like all different questions around. I mean, we're talking about deliberation in the green transition or the ecological transition, but then a lot of questions were linked to social justice, to inequalities, whether it's between urban areas and rural areas, or inequalities between the regions in Europe. I think, I mean, we heard about the analysis of kind of voter groups and different income groups, how they relate to the different parties. But I think this kind of narrative that poor people do not like environmentalism and that green stuff is kind of for urban, educated, middle-class people, it's a very powerful narrative that does not come from down there. It's a very powerful narrative that continues to be spun by those who want to maintain the status quo, whether that's corporate interest or whether it's the right-wing parties. So I think we need to be really, really careful not to kind of perpetuate this narrative, and to see how we can use deliberative democracy to actually undermine it. And Calypso just mentioned the yellow vests. I mean, I was always amazed by how the public narrative about what the yellow vests were, I guess we can talk about the past, was so much different from how they identified themselves. I mean, the leaders of the yellow vests always clearly said, we're not against environmental policies, we're not against carbon pricing. We're just fed up by a system where fuel is made expensive, but people have to commute for rural areas to do their job, while the rich are not being taxed. But that narrative was not popular, and that was not what the mainstream media said about the yellow vest. It was just about poor people don't like environmentalism, and politicians using that movement to say, oh, it can't be done, and we can't do it fast. We need to slow down. It's too much, So I think what you said, Anthony, about the Belgian just transition process, including the deliberative aspects of it, and really trying to look for ways of making sure that especially those who are from low income or poor neighborhoods or people with less education, how can we really make sure that in these kind of formats we really understand their perspective and that they're really able to express their perspectives and their concerns. I think this is really one of the core areas where we need to continue innovating. And I remember with some of you who were also part of the conference on the future of Europe, very early on, we asked the question, what do we actually know about those 800 citizens that were selected? What kind of data do you have about their education, their income? Do we have any representation of minorities? Because they weren't very visible, and some minorities are not visibly, you can't see whether people are necessarily part of certain minorities. And there was an unwillingness to talk about that, and data protection was always used as an argument, to say, well, we can't really talk about it. And I think, and there was another colleague yesterday who kind of brought in the question of kind of environmental justice and marginalized communities in these processes. So I really think this is one of the areas where we can further drive innovation, and then also make sure, like for instance, in the Belgian example, that deliberative democracy can kind of contribute to undermine that polarization between kind of social justice and environmental policies.
Okay, thank you very much. Before we close, just a couple of things I'd like to say. First is, Jan, you're always correct. I think you made a small mistake this time. I think what I actually said was that this project has to save us, actually, maybe not completely, but partly. I wanted to ask everybody if they could just stand up for one moment, if you don't mind, before we end. And for those of you who are in the back, just look straight up, and everybody else, if you could turn around and look up there, because today we had our online, partly online panel, and earlier we had a panel as well. We've had some great support from our staff. They're up there in the booth. There's Abel and Erwin that are up there. So if everybody can just say thank you. Thanks very much. Thank you. Doesn't mean that you're done. You're still working, but and then also in the back in the left, Benza. Benza has been the guy inside the room that has been helping quite a bit on the technical things. So thank you very much. And now everybody, we can give a standing ovation to our panel. Thank you so much. We're a little behind on the schedule, so I'd like to ask everybody to try to be back here at 11:20 after the coffee break. 11:20. Thanks again.
Welcome back, everybody. I hope you enjoyed your tea, lunch, drinks. This is the last sort of session before the final closing. So what we would like to do is just share some of the key steps, next steps in the program until the end of the year. And Stephen asked me to facilitate that, but I actually get the people who are doing the next steps to explain something about this to you. So we'll start with Hilmi first to come and explain. And then on work package 2, particularly the Civil Society Forum for Sustainability. And then after that, Elsa will explain on the next steps in relation to the synthesis report and the Delphi panel. And then we have Stephen will conclude talking about what's happening after the summit, so the report and also the guidelines and tools and the Deliberation Academy. So Hilmi, over to you.
Hello, everyone. There's not much to say, but we have one more upcoming forum, which will take place in person in Brussels. The dates are, we identify the dates as 4th to 5th of November, and you see the partners there, project partners there, but maybe a bit on the idea, because what we want to organize the forum about is now that we have the new mandate and there's new MEPs and so on and so forth, that we wanted to focus on in terms of what civil society wants in terms of for the future of the European Green Deal, and organize maybe different workshops around this and see what will be the next European Green Deal for civil society organizations. And for the registration and so on, we want to open the registration on our website, hopefully in July, and ask also civil society organizations if they want to organize a workshop to provide a bit of content of that workshop. So this is the main idea now. It needs to be framed a bit more concretely, but it will be available later in our website. So it will be accessible for all of you. And that's pretty much it. If there's any questions, happy to.
Super. Thank you. Then Inge will briefly give an update on work package 3.
Yes, thank you, Cecile. I just wanted to take the opportunity instead of the last words to say that here in this session. So the work package 3 is our wonderful empirical cases, test cases across the board, across the countries and the levels. So as we had the workshop and presented them all, most of them yesterday. So we will finalize now this report and the sheets. There is some of our draft sheets about these cases is outside. So there are prints, just grab them. It's different countries and formats. As I said, just drafts, but can be inspirational and nice to read. We will do this then systematically, check with all of our partners and finalize this, including this analysis that Pete presented yesterday along these horizontal issues, recruitment, conduction, which also is a part of the evaluation. There is a certain overlap. And we are also considering to do more capacity building. So because everything was very short here, that we will do the learnings out of these practical conductions, preparation and conduction of these test cases with the consortium and partners. So that will be also around that time in fall, after we have now finished all of our work to do. Thanks.
Thank you. What I forgot to do is, do people have any questions? Maybe to Hilmi first. Are there any questions for Hilmi on the CSO forum? You have a question? Yeah, sure. Mike. Nee, dat moet jij moeten. Can somebody help, please?
Yes, here.
Yeah, but you need a mic, right? Yes, it works fine.
Oh, sorry. 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 Yeah.
Okay. Hello, everyone. My name is Felicia Edinri Ajayi. I am here representing the chairman of NIDO Portugal. I'm Nigerian and I live in Portugal. I am well aware that this Real Deal Summit is an EU program, is about the EU Green Deal. And the conversations I've listened to over the past few days and the workshops I also was involved in have really been very insightful. Where I come from, the mainstream conversations usually just about good governance, security, food security inclusive, and some other things. So yeah, talking about the climate, it's not like we don't have pockets of organizations that also talk about climate change and all of that, but it's not mainstream. So, I'm sorry, I wrote some points down so I don't miss what I'm about to say. So if this conversation is about Europe, yeah, and if Europe gets it right at the end of the day, if Europe gets it right, we are talking about globalization and all of that. How does this trickle down to the global south? I don't think if Europe gets it right and other parts of the world don't get it right, Europe will still be safe in terms of immigration rather, we'll have a lot of issues still that we are dealing with currently. So I don't know, I think I've tried to make my point. If it's not clear, I can come back, yeah.
Yeah, I think so. What you're trying to say is what we're doing here in Europe, what is the impact on
the global south? Yes,
right?
yes,
and
yes.
how do we really take that into account?
Yes.
It came up a few times, but it didn't also, I agree with you, didn't hear it very strongly in all of the other discussions, and I'm not sure whether you are. So I think anybody can respond to that, if you like. Is there anybody in the audience who wants to respond to that? Or you want to say something?
I mean, I can say something as a, let's say, strong European citizen or so, and have worked on all my career on Europe and making Europe better, including the responsibility of Europe in the global in the globe. And I think it is very, very useful and important that we in Europe work on bringing our footprint down, which increases the capacity then for the global south to develop. And to jointly, it's common but differentiated responsibility and governance. I'm very much behind that. And together, we want to find solutions that helps the already high footprint countries to bring it down, and to help the still low footprint countries not to having to go this up and then down, but to go directly to a sustainable lifestyle. And we need participation and democracy for this. So we believe we need democracy for this. We definitely need to bring the people along, because it's people who live and eat and drink and so on. And therefore, this is what we are trying to do in the project, to marry sustainability and democracy.
Just maybe one thing within the Real Deal project context and the Civil Society Forum. I very much agree as well, and we try to bring these discussions in the forum as well, and several times to try to discuss what's the global dimension of the European Green Deal, by inviting also people from the global south to these discussions to bring their own experience to the table and their knowledge. So to continuously have these discussions, it's one of the things that we try to do with the forum as well. Just to give a bit of, input on that.
Are you okay with that answer? Yeah. Sort of, huh? It doesn't answer your question. It's a big question, I think. Yeah. Yeah. So then make them understand. Yes? So pick up that role yourself as well, I think, like what you're doing here. But I think all of us, people, I've been doing quite a lot of work in Africa as well. So people, who have that experience should bring it in as well. Yeah? Thank you for the question. Any other question? Yeah? Mike, yeah.
Hi, my name is Wilhelm. Thank you for a great conference. Just a small question on the event happening in November. Will it be like the same process of like the picking of the participants as with the Feminist Festival and like the biodiversity, or will it be a whole different setup?
I mean, on that a bit, it's going to be based on the registration, and we need to keep up to a certain, let's say, number of participants, but it's not going to be as the process it happened with the feminist.
Not like a quota.
No.
Yeah,
It's
that's my
open
point.
It's open for everyone.
Okay.
The forum, yeah.
Great. Then I would like to invite Elze to share what we're doing in relation to the synthesis report and the Delphi panel, and what basically the next steps are.
Okay, thank you. I think we already discussed most of this yesterday, so I won't talk about that too much. But for the synthesis report, our deadline is the end of September, and in the end it will be a public report, so it will also be shared on our website for everybody else to read. And yeah, well, of course, this is important input for the protocol as well, that Stephen will tell more about. And then we have another exciting thing going on. This is the Delphi panel. So in some countries there were Delphi groups or Delphi panels organized, but we also organize one ourselves as the Real Deal project. So we invite, hopefully now 16 experts, but we have 15 or 16 experts who come together in the 9th and 10th of July in Brussels to, yeah, kind of, well, validate our results, discuss our results, but also provide new input for the protocol. So we really discuss questions with these experts that are both practitioners and academics that work in the field of citizen participation or deliberative democracy. And we discuss really crucial questions we have with them to learn from their experience. So I'm really excited about that as well. And there will be a report made of this event as well. Anybody has questions? Nope. Okay.
That was clear. Good, thank you. Great. Stephen, can you please describe on the next steps? So that's the summit report, the protocol, and then the Deliberation Academy.
Okay, my name is Stephen Steck. You've seen a lot of me, but we're almost to the end. So yeah, a couple of things. The first, of course, is the report of this meeting. I'd like to remind those people who have been rapporteurs and those who have led sessions not to forget, after we leave here, please, as soon as you can, provide the reports from your sessions. That will go into a summit report, which then will be published. It will be also on our website. And that's something which is due by the end of July. So if you are looking for that on our Real Deal website, you'll find that hopefully by the end of July. And then with respect to the protocol itself, so we've introduced the protocol here to many of you, and we just want to give you the opportunity, if you're interested in this. And again, we use the term protocol, but what we're really talking about is guidance, materials, and a toolkit for citizen engagement in the European Green Deal. If you are interested, if you've gotten interested from this, or you already have been involved in some way up to now, please let us know. You can let me know. You can let Anna, my colleague here, know. You can let any of us who are in the Real Deal project know, and we will include you going forward. So We are incorporating the outcomes from the project. You heard already in the case of the synthesis report that will be done in September. So that's going to be incorporated. Also, the results of the Delphi panel will be incorporated, and some of the other results from the in-country activities are going to be incorporated. So, but in the meantime, we're also working on the structure of this guidance and toolkit and the various tools which will be made available. So the ultimate deadline for this is the end of January, but there'll be a lot of work and a lot of milestones in between. So anyone who's interested, please let us know. And then something we haven't really talked about here up to now, but it is also one of the outputs of this project, and that is a Citizen Deliberation Academy. This is something which we are designing in the context of this project, a virtual learning hub, which would include the materials from the Real Deal project, but also many others. It would include self-directed online courses, forums, teaching aids, and other materials aimed at social learning in regard to citizen deliberation. So that's something where what we will do by the end of January is to design this Deliberation Academy, and what happens after this project is really up to those organizations and individuals who might be interested in working on a Citizen Deliberation Academy going forward. So we're not actually going to be setting up the academy in this project, but we are designing something which then can be carried forward as a follow-up to this project. And again, that makes it quite open to anyone who might be interested in being involved in that. And again, please come and approach any of us, and we will try to involve you. So I believe that's it. Thank you. Any questions?
Just a little correction. I think when you wrote there REVM, you probably mean RIFs. That's us. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, just a question on which languages the material will be available on the Deliberation Academy platform.
Yeah, that's an element that we have discussed already in the context of the design of the academy. So yeah, it's very important that we make this available in multiple languages. Again, it's a kind of a thing where it depends on the partners and the resources that are identified, but it's a fundamental element of this Citizen Deliberation Academy that it should be available in all official languages within the European Union, and also even outside, because we also have the neighborhood that's a part of this project, the European neighborhood as well.
In principle, we have our multilingual online platform, I think, which you also use. So that's a very good starting point for working and designing this multilingual way.
Actually, yeah, let me ask you, so the synthesis report and etc., but will you actually have a meeting with Commission people? Will you do some dissemination towards the new members of the European Parliament? I would be interested.
Well, with the outreach, we have been in contact with the democracy people in the Commission all the time. So those who are running these citizen panels, informing them about what we are doing, so keeping that interest. There's quite we are working very well with the Democratic Odyssey, where there's again this the link to the Commission of the European University Institute. And on the sustainability environment side, that goes largely via our NGOs partners and the civil society forum, which is the joint efforts for this. So the policy advocacy goes that strand, and through the democracy. So for our efforts, we clearly do it with those people. And there's a very concrete advocacy mission actually I'm doing, namely that is an initiative of the Belgian EU presidency, which organized a citizen assembly as EU presidency. So the presidency is this rotating thing from member state to member state. And their idea is, or their desire, their initiative is that this will be picked up by other presidencies. So we have the Hungarian presidency coming up, but for this, I guess the idea is too late and probably will not fly very well either. But the next one is the Polish EU presidency, where, as presented yesterday, we had a very successful national level assembly as part of the real deal. So that will hopefully, that's my advocacy or our advocacy, to bring this to the responsible EU minister, who then eventually inspires him to write this really then in the program of the next presidency. The particular role of Poland is also that they are the first of the next trio presidency. So that's a rather weak, let's say, institution, but at least it is 3 presidency in the rows, and they have a program of kind of 10 pages or so. If that is in, there is a bit of chance that this continues. And the next, by the way, presidency is Denmark, where we also had a very successful case and where we had already strong contacts with the European Commission on this, our topic, European semester, which is on economic policy. So there is quite some links into the Commission for sure.
Thank you. So, yes, I want to ask something. That do we have considered to establish a connection between our project and the OECD initiative on reinforcing democracy that was endorsed at the end of 2022 by all our ministers at EU level? Because I think that it can be something useful. As ASVIS, in the recommendation for the next EU Commission, we have put the focus on this declaration that nobody knows, at least in Italy. Thank you. This is a consideration that I'm posing to the Assembly. Do you want to respond?
Naya, I mean, you could, as typical for such things, we are a consortium, we have all our networks and contacts and so on. So everybody can grab such opportunities and bring that in, and then you can test the waters, and then if there's a good response, then bring it back. I mean, just don't think hierarchically, but think networking. So if you have good contacts to the OECD and this initiative, bring it in, and then we see and hear very soon, hopefully.
Then we'll go to the last step. And the last Mentimeter. So we just have a few final questions for you. There are 6 here. The last question is an open question where you can give any feedback, anything you want to share. The other questions are easy to pick, I think. So please go to the Mentimeter form and QR code. So just a few final comments. So you won't be sent a survey, you don't have to fill in something on paper. This is the last final chance to give us feedback. Yeah, I think we can start, right? All right, so just some final feedback. So the first question is kindly indicate in one word, and it overlaps a little bit with the one from yesterday, but there might be some new insights. But look at the summit as a whole. How do you sum up your key takeaway from this summit? And think for yourself before you look at the screen. So don't get influenced by others, but use your own thinking. Yeah, I think it's quite clear. Deliberation is really in the center, and it's mentioned by a lot of people. But related to that, cooperation, connections, networking, inspiration, optimism. I think that was also coming from this morning, I think. So it's nice to see all of this. Thank you. Then the next question. So here there are statements, and you can indicate to what extent you agree with each of the statements. So if you think the summit was well organized, you pull the bar to the right. You strongly agree. If you think it wasn't well organized, you pull it to the left. Or if you think it's sort of okay, but it's in the middle. So just pull it where you think it is. So there's 4 questions. One is about how well the summit was organized. The other one is about engagement of consortium partners in the preparation of the summit. Then the level of engagement of civil society organizations during the summit, and the level of engagement of experts during the summit. Great. So if we just look at the majority now, on the whole, it's positive, but I can also see there's room for improvement. So the feedback, keep it in your mind. You get the last question, you can fill in whatever observations or suggestions or whatever you have, any feedback. That's where you can write it down. Yeah? But generally, it's on the positive side, with particularly the engagement of CSOs was people strongly agree with. Thank you. Then we go to the next, also on statements, but these are statements on the methods used during the summit. So to what extent do you agree with the following statements on the methods? So did you think the panel discussions were useful? If you strongly agree, you pull it to the right. If you think, no, they were not so useful, then you don't pull it so far. And then the other one is about the usefulness of group discussion, and the last one, the usefulness of the presentations. Yeah, so if we look at it also on the positive side, people generally think the panel discussions were useful, also group discussions even a bit higher, and then also presentations were useful. Great. Then, what's this? I thought there was a question. Something went wrong there, but the question is, any feedback, I don't know why it was like that, I did something wrong, but the question is, what feedback do you have for the organizers? So anything you would like to say finally that you haven't said, or do you want to give us feedback, or any observations, or anything you want to say, you can put it here. Yeah? Credits to Borbala, yay. All right, I don't know whether, I'm sure some people are still filling in. But if I'm reading through it, people have basically generally appreciated it. Where we could have done better is what I've seen in a lot of the comments is more interaction. So that's, and I understand that because we're talking about what we've done out there, but then we don't really do it here. So that could have, I fully understand that. So that interaction is also what we need to bring in a summit. Sometimes also a little bit more clarity on the purpose of a panel or why we do this, or so really take people along a little bit more. And a big thank you basically to the organizers. Yeah, so those, but I think the main point was more interaction, if I get it right. So thank you for your comments, your inputs, your suggestions. It's something that we well, we can't change it now, of course, but it's very important for us to reflect on that. And I think there's so much experience in the room that we can learn from, so we should really bring that on board more in whatever event we are organizing ourselves, whether within the project or somewhere else, I think. Yeah, so don't just walk the talk, or is that the word? Is that the phrase? I don't know, but yeah. Okay, thank you. So is there anybody who wants to say something just before we do the final conclusion? Anybody wants to say something? You said it all? Then give a big clap to yourself. Oh, sorry, there was another one. Just a simple one. I forgot about that one. How do you feel right now? And you can actually answer multiple. Do you feel inspired, tired, confused, connected, empowered? So that's the last one. No, one only? Oh, I thought I changed it to you can click. Then you have to make a choice. Next time. I thought I clicked on you can choose more, but okay, fine. You have to make a choice. So what I see is that I think the majority is filled now. The connection is really important, and I think it's quite logic. And we have a very diverse group, so I think that is also interesting, but it's also part of the project itself, I think, part and parcel of that, so that's great. People feel inspired. Luckily, nobody's confused. Some feel very tired, and I think probably particularly the ones that have been organizing all of these or that had to. And like yesterday was also a very long day, so I could imagine you're also still tired because of that. Some feel empowered, so thank you very much. So Steve, over to you.
So we're at the end of these 3 days, or 2 days over the course of 3 days. I have to express the apologies of our director, Latsi Brust, who sends his regards, but he is unable to make it for this last session to greet you, but he wishes you all a safe journey home. I do want to thank a few people before I turn it over to our last two speakers, who are our co-coordinators, Inga and Manuela, who have a few closing words. But I do want to thank a few people while I have the chance. I think you already saw some acknowledgement of Borbala, back in the corner. So I want to say thanks. She's actually been the main organizer here. And a lot of other colleagues here have helped out. There's one Judith and another Bori. Also Flora, who's in the back, Olena, Kinga, Joab, Sylvia, and a few others that you didn't see behind the scenes. We already have said something to our technical staff. Special thanks to my colleague in the Democracy Institute, Anna, who is here, I think, somewhere in the back. Hi. And This summit is part of one of we have obviously work packages within the project. The work package is led by the Wageningen University Research, and that's Cecile and Elsa who are here. There are other colleagues that are behind the scenes. Also the EEB colleagues who helped out a lot, Margarita. Also, I want to say special thanks to Manuela and Inga as well, and all of those who led our sessions and our speakers, and of course you who came here from everywhere around Europe to participate with us. So I really want to say thank you as well. So let me ask Inga and Manuela if you would come up and give us your last impressions and send us on our way.
Thank you very much, Stephen. The thanks are also really wholeheartedly from me. I already thanked in the beginning the team here at the CEU for the great organization. Borbela yesterday did it with this wonderful restaurant, really a great surprise for all. I would connect to my introduction with the main goals of the Real Deal project. Of course, we bring this now to our final dessert. As I said, we had some intros, entrees last year. We had the hot kitchen this year with all these experiments and case studies. And we are now really moving to the dessert and bringing this dessert and coffee, bringing this all to a closure. And all this, from what I heard, and the networking here also again, is really great to see that beyond. So I think we succeeded, well, from what we can now already see is we did succeed to bring the sustainability community and the democracy community together. There is vibrant links, and also it's very great to see that this will continue beyond the project. I mean, we have these wonderful connections to the Democratic Odyssey that has already continued during the project, and I see now this new emerging, a new network, Democracy for Transition Coalition, that's really top. I think has the same purpose, the same aim we had, and that's wonderful that this is coming. There is already a Nets for Dem network where also Anthony is leading in a leading function, and then there's this new project coming up called Scale Dem, which is then a bit underpinning all these networking activities, community linking activities from the knowledge side, and also what the social disparities, so the different context that was also a challenge or an ambition for Real Deal. We already did this, Stephen, in our first work package, look at different contexts. This is this handbook which was out there, and the country profiles, that was the same intention to look at this. We work in different contexts. We have different political and administrative and participation cultures and countries. So these democratic innovations resonate differently in different countries. So we have to, when designing it, we have to be aware of this. And this new project will do this in a more systematic way. So in a way, pick up with that. What I also think, what we can already say now from having some kind of first insights, comparative insights in all our test cases, we can say that this hypothesis, we need different formats for different purposes. We can already confirm that this is really a good idea, and also then using these different purposes for feeding into one another. One very strong example is our story with the focus group and citizen assemblies is kind of plausible. We know all these concerned groups you bring easier to the table in the format focus group, but also very strong was this aspect of knowledge input, where we had this group Delphi format, which is very interesting, and we have another one in July, which is for a citizen assembly, has the advantage that people get a kind of a assessed insight in the spectrum of expert knowledge versus what is typical for citizen assemblies, that a kind of selected number of experts give their testimony or their opinions, and then citizens cannot really put this in perspective. Is that extreme, or are there other opinions or expertise as well? So that was quite well, and we had 2 experiments how this fed in. And similarly, the challenge of different roles of civil society organizations and in citizen deliberations, and there we also experimented quite well and can confirm that there are very useful roles played by civil society organizations with their policy background, with their networks, and helping in designing the topic, in framing the topic for a citizen assembly, and organizing, being a convener for certain formats themselves, as well as in combination with process experts, which we also had in the project, who are very fit in designing then certain formats themselves, and unbiased moderation and inclusivity. And what was quite new, that's my third and last point, is we also had the ambition with the multi-level, bringing this level together. We did this a bit with our national level and EU level, and I'm very confirmed that for the future, we have to have this strongly in mind and continue to work on this. So we see our 3 tracks, we have to continue to work on this. And that was this great example actually from Hungary, where you might remember from yesterday, where they had 2 they had stakeholder roundtables at 2 levels, 5 at local level and 1 at national level. And we had a bit of reflection afterwards, and it did exactly this, that on the ground you found what are the real problems on the ground, which in this case was this too hot soup and too short break in the school for the school food. But the rules for changing this are at national level, and then you need another assembly and reflections at the national level for doing then the right policy. So that was really nicely confirmed, and we will, I would say, we will work on this in the future in all these, well, first of all, we have to have our homework now today. We have a rolling up the sleeves again in front of us, preparing the dessert and the coffee then until probably, yeah, before Christmas we will have everything ready, and then the finalization in January. But it's very nice to see already now that there is this post-project activities, including, of course, which I do not want to forget, the Civil Society Forum and the link to the SDG Watch Europe. This is the civil society umbrella at EU level, where it kind of started. Many things in this project were born out of SDG Watch Europe, and I really hope, well, we know that it has given quite some energy in SDG Watch Europe, and I hope this will carry on then also after the project. Many thanks.
Thank you, Ingeborg, and yeah, thank you for those 3 fantastic days. It's been a pleasure to be with all of you, and I will just make some short remarks which more or less overlap with what was said previously, but thank you again for the wealth of knowledge, dialogue, and shared experiences of those days. I think that this discussion have not only illuminated some critical issue facing our democracy today, but as well as inspired us with innovative approaches and actionable strategies in terms of participation. Regarding the issue that we're facing today, I think we have delved deeply into the complexity of underrepresentation and, if I may, also tokenization in democratic processes. Democracy demands that we go beyond superficial measure and strive to create meaningful spaces integrated into the decision-making fabric of our societies. And this means ensuring that their contribution, especially the one coming from more marginalized groups, help shape the policy and the practice that affect directly their lives. It was also recognized the role of civil society participation as a powerful agent of change, bridging the gap between citizens and policymakers, and their work in advocacy and community mobilization, which is essential in creating vibrant ecosystem of democracies. So we must continue to support and collaborate with those entities, recognizing their role in fostering democratic resilience. And within the ecosystem of democracy, we need to also recognize the interconnectedness of various democratic institutions, processes, and actors. I want to thank you, the representative of the country outside the EU that has pointed out how the EU is actually contributing negatively to environmental footprint outside, for instance, by exporting electronic waste in some countries. So we need to speak also, about real sustainability and coherence also outside our own borders. We also emphasize, the perspective of different institutions and actors from the local, national, and global level, and we must support, of course, each other. In terms of combination of topics, you have all very well highlighted the fact that we cannot speak of a certain issue without addressing inequality. Inequality is now one of the 14 global megatrends. So that is about not only the EU, but also outside. And there is a publication which was released on the 1st of June by the research arm of the European Commission on new emerging risks, such as food security, biodiversity loss, and again, widening inequality, which cannot be discussed isolated, but because they are deeply intertwined with the wealth of our democracy. For instance, food security, that is a fundamental human right, and ensuring it requires democratic governance that prioritizes sustainable food systems, sustainable consumption and production, and many other actions. So we cannot speak only about prosumer when it comes to energy. We should also speak about prosumer, which are both producer and consumer when it also comes to policy making. The same thing with biodiversity loss, which undermine the ecological foundation upon which our society depends, and the inequalities in all its form, which erode the very principle of democracy. So I see in the future that we should also focus on more justice-based topics, and this is what Citizen wants to talk about. Lastly, this is a collective journey and does not end here. This conference was a stepping stone towards a larger movement, so let us commit together to more ongoing collaboration, learning, and action that meets the needs of the present and the future generation. Thank you very much.
And one important takeaway, I forgot what Cecile told us with this coconut that I think we also take all at home. Thanks.
So thank you. This concludes the meeting. I do want to point out again, and I think we have to acknowledge the support of the European Union Horizon Program, not to forget that. You can also see all of our partners here in the Real Deal Consortium. So thank you once again for your attention. I hope you have a good rest of your day. If you're staying longer in Budapest, I wish you a nice stay. Thanks again.
Thanks to you guys.
Coming.
Thank you for coming. Pleasure.
Issues. We were
Only
some,
issues?
just some.
No, I